Living in China isn't just different, it's a world few outsiders truly understand. Beyond the modern skylines and historic landmarks, it's a country full of contrasts, where old traditions meet new technology, and where social rules aren't always obvious, but still shape how people live and interact. China offers huge opportunities in business, tech, and culture, but daily life can also come with challenges that rarely make the news. Countries around the world are racing to invest in China, and it's easy to understand why. For decades, it has been one of the fastest-growing economies on the planet. That rapid growth has turned it into a magnet for foreign investment, fueling everything from manufacturing and tech to infrastructure and retail. The country is currently the second-largest economy in the world by gross domestic product (GDP), with a forecast of over $19 trillion GDP in 2025. That still puts it well behind the United States' $30 trillion projection, but it's more impressive if you look in the other direction. Behind China, third place goes to Germany with a forecast of $4.7 trillion. With that kind of gulf, it's not a surprise that China wants everyone to view them as the world's second superpower. And they're making some big moves to boost that perception. If you visit China now, you might be surprised just how familiar it feels to the United States. While China does have many of its own mega chains, they also roll out the red carpet for American brands. Walk the streets of Beijing or Shanghai, and you'll spot some of the thousands of McDonald's and Starbucks outlets scattered across the country. It's all part of China's decision to make themselves an international business hub, welcoming visitors from all around the world to tour, do business, and maybe stay. And that includes bringing some of the most beloved brands of all time. China now has two Disney parks located in Shanghai and Hong Kong, the former British colony that has now been largely incorporated back into the mainland. Featuring some of the most iconic Disney-owned characters, they attract millions of tourists a year. And Disney's rival is never far behind. You can also find Universal Studios Beijing. Travel vloggers have covered these parks extensively, helping to create an image of China that is a fun and family-friendly destination. But it's not just about entertainment. The number one reason people come to China is to do business. China has put a lot of effort into rebranding itself as a global financial hub, with its economy being heavily driven by banking and manufacturing. China was one of the first countries to benefit from outsourcing and moving manufacturing overseas. This cut down manufacturing costs heavily and played a key role in driving China's economic growth. The country is currently the world's largest manufacturing economy and exporter, so it's no wonder more and more businesses are heading there. But can the good times really last forever? Over recent years, China's exports have steadily dropped and currently make up only 20% of the country's GDP. So the country has had to pivot the shifting to high-quality manufacturing of electronics and vehicles. After all, the word tariffs is on everyone's mind these days, and China isn't willing to let its economy be kneecapped. With China's financial and service sectors rapidly expanding, a growing number of skilled professionals are heading to the country to do business. Global companies are investing, partnerships are forming, and cities like Shanghai and Shenzhen are becoming major economic powerhouses. But beyond the headlines and impressive growth figures, what's life in China actually like? China is the world's second most populous nation, trailing only India by a few million, but with over 1.4 billion people. It still has more than 4 times the population of third-place United States. While that is a staggering number, China has the landmass to match it. It's neck and neck with the US as the third largest country by area. But huge swaths of that country are desert or countryside, which are sparsely populated. The vast majority of the country lives in densely packed cities, and 5 of China's urban centers rank among the 30 busiest in the world, and Beijing alone comes in at number 6. And that population glut was getting so intense, the country actually took measures to stop it. One of the most infamous chapters in modern China's history was the institution of the one-child policy, put into place in 1979. While it was meant to reduce the country's resource crunch, it had many unintentional consequences, including leading many parents to try to get a son as their only child. This led to a shortage of women in future generations, leaving many men without anyone to marry. Additionally, the government was internationally criticized for the harsh techniques it used to enforce the policy, and it was repealed in 2015. And it may have worked a little too well. As of 2024, China's population has declined for 3 straight years, with deaths now outpacing births, a trend that many analysts expect to accelerate. Some point to cultural habits formed during the one-child policy era. Others highlight growing economic pressures and uncertainty about the future. But a deeper issue may be demographic. Decades of population control have left a lasting imbalance. There simply aren't enough women of childbearing age to sustain population growth. In a dramatic policy reversal, the Chinese government is now offering incentives for families to have more children. It's a sharp pivot, but not surprising in a country where the government's influence is deeply woven into daily life. China has one of the longest and richest histories of any country on the planet, and has been ruled by dynasties and empires for much of that time. But the country we know as modern China was only founded in 1912 as the Republic of China. It would spend the first few decades of its existence as a pawn in fast-growing global conflicts, culminating in a brutal occupation by the Japanese Empire, considered one of the darkest chapters in the nation's history. And out of that nightmarish period came a new political outlook, and one that led to the rise of one of the most ruthless regimes the world has ever seen. After a civil war, China was taken over by the Chinese Communist Party and became known as the People's Republic of China. Under its first leader, Mao Zedong, China saw tens of millions of people die in famines and political purges, and its entire political and cultural system overturned. Known as the Cultural Revolution, this era saw intellectuals persecuted, professionals forced to move to the country and take up farming, and any sign of dissent scrutinized and severely punished. This left scars on the country that are still felt today. But future leaders of the Chinese Communist Party reformed things and focused on rebuilding the country and making it a key power player on the world stage while not giving up even an iota of power. Which leads many people to ask, is China still communist? It's complicated. The country is still ruled by the Chinese Communist Party, which sets policy through its Politburo of 24 officials and appoints a president, currently Xi Jinping. One of the longest-serving leaders China has had in the modern era and seen as its most powerful since Mao. Elections are largely a formality, and anti-communist activity is strictly prohibited. Under this government, the Chinese Communist Party has absolute control over policy, and it sets the direction for the country. And the direction it's picked seems to be capitalism. China's economy has transformed in ways that would have seemed unthinkable just a few decades ago. Not only has it opened up to global trade, but it now actively welcomes foreign businesses and investors. Skyscrapers in major cities house everything from international banks to Instagrammable cafes, and the streets are lined with familiar American brands. But the exchange isn't one-sided. Chinese companies like Alibaba and Temu have become household names in the US, reshaping online shopping and e-commerce. But under the surface, the situation is more complicated. China's government has boards that regulate what is and isn't allowed into the country, and censorship is common, not just to remove ideas that the government doesn't approve of, but to protect Chinese cultural products from competition. This is extremely noticeable in the film industry, as only a small percentage of American films are allowed into the country. The process of applying for approval is highly competitive. The China Film Administration isn't shy about requiring edits to Western films to get them approved, such as removing any political references that China disapproves of. And the competition for the Americans will be rough. Chinese cinema goers might not be able to watch the latest Marvel or Star Wars movie on the big screen, but they'll have no shortage of options to pick from. China has built its own rival film industry, making blockbuster movies for a Chinese audience that rarely make their way overseas. These include historical epics, martial arts films, and kids' movies. In fact, a recent release, Niza 2, was such a huge hit in China that it became the top-grossing animated movie of all time globally, almost entirely from its Chinese box office. The country is flexing its financial power, and many people think they're only going to keep pushing the American options out of the market. And as tensions rise, culture might not be the only thing pushed out. The relationship between the US and China has never been particularly warm, and in recent years, it's grown even colder. There have been a number of high-profile cases of Westerners, specifically Americans, being detained overseas. Cases like Otto Warmbier in North Korea and journalist Austin Tice in Syria, both of whom never returned home, have raised global awareness about the dangers Americans can face abroad. Add to that the detentions of celebrities in Russia, often under questionable charges, and it paints a troubling picture. Could something like that happen in China? But the truth is, no one can say for sure. As geopolitical pressure builds, so does the uncertainty for anyone caught in the middle. China doesn't typically engage in the same kind of hostage diplomacy that Russia does, and it doesn't have nearly as many citizens detained abroad. It has been accused of arresting prominent businessmen on charges usually related to corruption or drugs around the same time as prominent Chinese businesspeople were arrested abroad. This in particular led to a standoff with Canada over the detained from both countries. But most experts believe that China's determination to be seen as a top place to do business offers a level of protection for people there legitimately. But that only goes so far. The Chinese judicial system is known for being efficient and harsh. It was completely reorganized during the Cultural Revolution, and today serves as one of the Chinese Communist Party's core organs of social power. On the surface, it looks a lot like many of the court systems in the West, with the Supreme People's Court serving as the final law of the land, while local courts handle civil and criminal cases. It also has separate courts for military, transportation, maritime, and internet-related matters. But it's the criminal law where things really differ. China's criminal justice system is known for having one of the highest conviction rates in the world. Its system was dramatized in the 1990s thriller Red Corner, where an American lawyer is framed for murder in China and discovers that the premise of innocent until proven guilty does not apply there. While the judicial system does allow for the accused to have representation and present evidence in their defense, the system is tilted heavily in favor of the prosecutor. Over 99% of cases brought to trial in China resulting in convictions. The country also tends to have harsh sentences for those convicted for just about any crime. And that will likely lead anyone who slips up to the Chinese prison system. Sure, the Nordic prisons might look like hotels, but they're still pretty and pleasant places to be. American prisons are infamous for overcrowding, poor quality food and sanitation, and violence among fellow inmates. But those who have survived Chinese prison have some harrowing stories to tell. Most Chinese prisons take the form of work camps. And like Japanese prisons, which have a strict schedule and function largely like day-to-day jobs in industry, Chinese prisons are often compared to sweatshops. Inmates can expect long days, limited food, harsh conditions, and beatings from the guards for the slightest offense. China is believed to be the country that carries out the most executions in the world. We say believed, because the country is infamously tight-lipped about its capital punishment numbers. But it does have a long list of crimes subject to the death penalty. This includes the typical crime of murder, as well as arson or certain particularly heinous forms of assault. China also cracks down harshly on drug crimes, with drug trafficking being a common crime visitors wind up facing the death penalty for. But surprisingly, financial crimes like bribery and embezzlement are also eligible, as are political crimes like organizing a mass rebellion against the party. This is because capital punishment in China is primarily designed to punish crimes against the state, rather than crimes against the individual. There was even a death penalty statute on the books for killing giant pandas before it was removed in 1997. And once the sentence is passed down, justice tends to be swift. While China has more avenues for appeal of a sentence than your average dictatorship, it still carries out executions far quicker than they do in the United States. Every part of the death penalty process is strictly regulated, and the executions are carried out by firing squad or lethal injection. The executions are not open to the public, and the country has sped things up by using execution vans, mobile systems that are equipped with lethal injection technology. While there has been talk about reforming the death penalty in China and eliminating 13 crimes from the charter of primarily financial crimes like counterfeiting and smuggling, it still remains a very real threat for anyone who commits a crime in the country. And like other dictatorships around the world, China doesn't have the overt reputation for persecuting Westerners who settle there. That would be a big deterrent to investment. Disney would likely abandon ship fast if there were reports of tourists being detained as they tried to leave Shanghai Disneyland, but things can change quickly. China's government holds a lot of power over the population, and when the circumstances change, they're not afraid to use that power. And everyone found that out the hard way in 2020. When the COVID-19 pandemic started in China and spread around the world, people soon noticed something. While countries like the US and UK were having devastating waves of the virus, China seemed to be getting along just fine. They had shockingly low rates of infection and death. Some credited it to the Asian tendency to take sanitation and virus protection very seriously, while others claimed that China must be undercounting the cases. Others came up with much darker conspiracies, but few talked about the truth. China could institute a lockdown and seriously enforce it. The Chinese Communist Party is known for its high level of social control, and when the virus hit, they acted quickly. The lockdown that followed was known not just for closing down most businesses in China for months, but for strictly regulating the movement of the average citizens. Leaving your home without approval was a criminal offense, and there were even reports of buildings having their exits sealed shut by the government. The lockdowns went on far longer than in most countries, which helped to keep case numbers very low for the first year. But when things opened more in China, the country was hit hard by a later wave of the virus. Still, China's biggest defenders point to this as a case in favor of the country's system. And the government has more ways to ensure cooperation than just criminal penalties. China once made global headlines with its controversial social credit system, a government initiative that tracked more than just criminal behavior. People could be penalized for defaulting on loans, breaking traffic laws, or even being accused of behavior deemed antisocial. Critics quickly raised red flags. They saw it as a powerful tool for blacklisting individuals who had fallen out of favor with the authorities. The backlash wasn't just domestic. International media coverage fueled widespread criticism, painting the system as dystopian and authoritarian. Facing growing public scrutiny and bad PR abroad, the central Chinese government quietly began phasing the system out, which made some people think it might be time to invest in China again. But wait. If there was one word defining China right now, it's uncertainty. The country is in one of the most complex periods in its history. While it's still as tightly controlled by the Chinese Communist Party as ever, it's also looking to expand its footprint in the global world of capitalism. But that's not the only way China is looking to expand its footprint. Under Xi Jinping, the country has made foreign policy moves that have put it on many people's radar as a potential threat for war. Life in China for citizens is heavily defined by patriotism, and most government media sells a story of China's iconic past and bold future. And that future involves a lot more territory than it has now. The first sign of this came when China took back control of the colony of Hong Kong from the British. At first, they promised to respect Hong Kong's system of democracy, but as the years went on, they started passing laws to restrict its autonomy, tightly controlling election slates, and arresting opposition leaders. And that made many areas close to China very nervous. None more than the one that might be an independent country, depending on who you ask. Taiwan split from China during the Civil War in the late 1940s, and has been a capitalist democracy for most of its existence. But if you ask China, it's still just a breakaway province, and they've blocked international recognition of Taiwan for decades. This is probably the country's most intense geopolitical issue, with the leadership even threatening a plane carrying U.S. House Leader Nancy Pelosi if it landed in Taiwan. The U.S. called China's bluff and the plane was fine. But it remains a massive bone of contention, with the U.S. vowing to defend Taiwan if it's attacked, and China conducting intense war games activities around the island. Taiwan agrees that there is only one country. Its official doctrine is that it's the legitimate government of all of China. But sometimes, China isn't just feuding with other territories, it's making them. Taiwan is China's most long-standing international conflict, but its most tense right now might be in the South China Sea. The People's Republic has been building artificial islands around the area, which it claims in its entirety, despite many other countries laying claim to water space or considering it international water. These islands are multi-year projects, and many of them are being designed for resort space. But others are being designed for military bases, as China looks to freeze the U.S. out of the region and establish itself as a dominant military power in Asia. China has quickly risen to having the second highest defense spending in the world, behind the United States. While most of China's defense spending is in-house and done in secrecy, it does have plenty of deals with top defense companies around the world. That means that if someone worked in that industry, that might be the most bankable way to get a foothold in China. Of course, if things take a certain direction, everything is up in the air. No one wants to be in another country when a war breaks out. This was a concern when the Olympics were held in China, with many pundits worrying about the safety of American athletes should China make a move on Taiwan suddenly. But China, while its military can be aggressive, usually plays it cool and would rather play the long game. But most military analysts believe China is likely to follow in Russia's footsteps and make a play for Taiwan within the next decade, especially as Taiwan's own defense and computer sector keeps ramping up. What's likely to happen to foreigners in China if there's a war? That depends on who's involved. China likely hopes to keep the United States out of a war, bluffing with its nuclear arsenal and turning into a proxy war rather than a direct conflict. If things escalate, China has plenty of its own citizens in the US as well, so it's likely both sides would hesitate to target them too ruthlessly, especially as many of China's American visitors are the children of elites. Still, being a geopolitical bargaining chip doesn't sound all that appealing. But the biggest worry for China is that the country is a ticking demographic time bomb. Analysts will say that China is the world's fastest growing superpower. Some might even say that the US is on the decline and we're in the midst of the Chinese century. But others, including some who have deep knowledge of China, say that China may have already reached its peak. Its economic and social fabric is a lot more fragile than it may appear. And if they're right, the next few decades may not only bring uncertainty, but the chance of complete chaos. Is China really on the brink of collapse? If you ask Gordon C. Chang, the signs are all there. The American lawyer of Chinese background burst onto the map with his book The Coming Collapse of China, in which he indicted the Chinese Communist Party for creating an ineffective, progressive, bureaucratic state that was likely to start declining and face serious financial problems. He predicted that the country had no more than 5 years of stability left, but he made this prediction in 2001. So many people are a bit skeptical today. But many of his predictions have been borne out in other ways. While China's financial sector remains stable for now, it leans heavily on exports, a model that's becoming more vulnerable as countries begin protecting their own economic interests. The biggest blow could be the 2025 US tariffs. These new measures are expected to hit Chinese exports hard, prompting Beijing to announce retaliatory tariffs of its own. A trade standoff is already taking shape, and both sides are maneuvering to strike a new deal. But the big question is if China's internal economy is strong enough to weather the storm long term if its export market is hit hard. And when you have a state-run economy, there's only one person to blame. Much of Gordon Chang's thesis centered around the Chinese Communist Party's banking industry. China holds debts for many countries, and its central banks are secretive about their financial dealings. While China insists they're healthy, financial analysts continue to advise caution about investing in the country. But while China's economic growth hasn't started slowing down yet, it's seeing a worrisome decline in another area that's just as important to a country's future growth. China's declining population has gotten a lot of attention over recent years, as the country scrambles to try to undo the damage it did with the one-child policy. That includes benefits for families having children, which might make it a tempting place to settle down and have kids right now. But that's not the only area where the youth of China are providing a headache for the leadership. In just about every country, the youth tend to be contrarian and ready to argue with political orthodoxy, and China is no exception. Which makes many people wonder, can China's systems survive the current generation? This isn't China's first brush with youth dissension. Of course, most famously, the Tiananmen Square protests in 1989 led to images spread around the world, and are responsible for much of China's massive PR problems. But that was a specific group of protesters who were willing to go to bat against the government. The current dissension might not be as intense, but it might be more widespread, and that's a lot harder to combat. And if a whole generation is against a system of government, it's a lot harder to hold on to. And like everyone around the world, China has not been able to shield itself from global affairs. While China has been praised by some for prioritizing safety during the COVID pandemic, the harshness of the lockdown and the wave of the virus that followed has many Chinese residents questioning the effectiveness of the government. And everyone knows that in another crisis, it could happen again with the government taking even more power in the name of public safety. In the event of a war, national security is likely to lead to a lot of major changes. At first glance, life in China might not feel as distant as many expect. As a major global business hub, modern China features much of the same infrastructure and conveniences found in the West. International schools, familiar global brands, and widespread English signage make cities like Shanghai and Beijing surprisingly accessible for visitors from the US or Europe. And with China's long-standing multilingual culture, language barriers in urban centers are often lower than people imagine. But where things diverge is government oversight. Compared to Western nations like the US, often seen globally as relatively hands-off, China's government plays a much more active role in daily life. Jobs, residency, even basic freedoms can come under pressure for those who challenge key policies or stray from what's considered acceptable. For over 1 billion citizens, this isn't unusual. It's just life in one of the world's most powerful and closely monitored nations. Thanks for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. It really does make a difference. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time on Quest Mode.